This is Hannibal here from The Hannibal TV on YouTube. And today we have none other than one of the sons of Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff, WWE Hall of Famer, Pro Wrestling Hall of Famer, one of the toughest wrestlers of all time, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. None other than Travis Orndorff, who has a couple of his father's ropes behind him. And we're also airing on Travis's channel, which is dedicated to his father, Paul Orndorff. Actually, I'm not going to ask you how you're doing because I know you're in a good mental state right now, but you've been dealing with some family issues that you want to get cleared up here today.
Well, and I appreciate the invite on. You know, I being the child of a celebrity, even though his celebrity is 20 years ago, it's a package deal. So there's some positives to it. The people often, and it makes me laugh, but they kind of will give you the impression you're somehow royalty, and in reality, I don't go around telling everybody who my dad is. Unless it comes up or somebody sees a T-shirt or it's relevant to the conversation. And sometimes, because I've been in the public eye since my dad passed, and we've ran these pages, most people don't know that I have an older brother that is, named after my father. So my dad, people often forget or don't know, he was actually Paul Parlett Orndorff Jr. My brother is Paul Parlett Orndorff III. And, unfortunately, he's nine and a half, almost 10 years older than me. And so my dad and mom were 18 and 17 when he was born, versus 28 and 27 when I was born. So while we grew up with the same parents, we did not have the same parents. My parents were much more mature. My dad was in a better place. He obviously had started to build a career and wrestling. And so I didn't experience the same things my brother did, but unfortunately, he, as many people do, I myself have gone through it to an extent. He struggles and has struggled since I can remember. So I'm 47 now, and since a young age, this was something that he struggled with. So he's been in and out of my life, my entire life. And and the events that happened, sometimes people will confuse it because they don't know there's two sons. So my point to bring this to light was to not negatively impact the legacy that we built online with my father, to bring some clarity around the situation and also bring awareness. My brother, I don't condone what he's done. I'm so grateful for the Peachtree City Police Department and their execution in a very, very, precarious situation where they're driving at 100 miles per hour through, a parking lot and then on the streets. And, they got his car to stop safely. Obviously the car was totaled, but, he wasn't injured. None of the police were injured. Nobody else was injured, which is always my biggest fear. And, so to bring awareness and honestly, as crazy as this might sound, to bring some hope to people that are struggling with mental health or substance abuse. The consequences are real. With that said, I still love my brother. He's still my brother. That doesn't change. I don't condone his behavior. I did do everything in my power through other relationships, as well as speaking to him directly to get help. And my mom passed in January. And I remember when dad passed, like that was the most traumatic event of my life. And it broke me. Now, what I'll tell you is because of that grief, because of that brokenness, I found out who I am. I found out my purpose. I found a way to live, for me. And I always tell people, like, I'm not telling you what to do. I only know what works for me. So for me, it was my faith and therapy, community, mentorship, getting involved in volunteering, getting educated on, the mental health and substance abuse disorder. And so, this is as much a, yes, I want to clear the air that, it wasn't me, because people follow the pages. But more importantly, I want to be open to conversation about, substance abuse and mental health. I think this is, obviously it's a tragedy. My heart breaks. You never want to see it this way. And there was a time where I resented and hated him for it. In fact, real quick, I'll tell you a story. I was 16 years old and I was driving my best friend he was moving. So I was driving down his truck, which is registered to Paul Parlett Orndorff Jr. And we're driving through this small town in Fayetteville Georgia called Palmetto. And I was speeding. It was like 42 and a 25 or something like that as the speed limit changed. And I got pulled over at like gunpoint. Like they're pulling him and my best friend out of the car, and we have all this stuff in the back of the bed. And my brother had gone on a chase the year before that, and so they thought I was my brother because they didn't know Dad was a junior. So this has been a lifelong tragedy. But I will say where I'm at as a person today is one of, we've got to be accountable. There's still consequences. We don't condone the behavior. We don't look past it. But judgment is not mine, and I'm no better than he is a man. Like he had a different lifestyle and upbringing than I did, and I am no better than him. I am just as broken. I just happen to have had the opportunity and the foresight to get help. And that is not an easy thing to do if you don't know what to do and what it looks like. So, this is not meant to, berate or belittle my brother. If anything, please let it serve as an opportunity for somebody who's watching this to say, it's possible that could be me. And so I'm gonna seek help and not be ashamed of it.
So what exactly was he pulled over for? Was it driving without a license that started all of this? And I guess he happened to be under the influence when he was pulled over?
Well, so the record shows that he had felony charges in a neighboring county, city. Because he was in Fayetteville, I'm going to assume that was a violation of probation. He was currently on probation, as I understand it. I don't know all the details of those, the inner workings, but there was, outstanding charges. And, why did they flag the vehicle? Did it not have insurance? Did something come up, on the license plate? The Peachtree City Police are no joke. I mean, they're good at what they do. And so, for what reason they pulled my brother over, I really don't know. I have my own suspicions. Again, with the felony charges, my guess was it was a violation of parole or probation. He had gotten out of prison back in 2023 and around October, November. And so he had been out for a while and he was doing really well at first. And, I tried to talk to him even then going, hey man, you basically not lived a life in the real world. You've been behind bars. Let me connect you with some people that I know, that can, help you. And he wasn't interested at that time. And I think that I've been him. I've been not interested in getting help that I needed. I didn't know how else to live life. And so, for what reason they pulled him over, was he speeding? Was he swerving between lines? I genuinely don't know. The vehicle belonged to my mom. And so there's obviously some litigation with the estate and things that are still pending since her passing in January. But, after, for whatever reason, they flagged him and the lights went on, he I'm sure he panicked. Obviously, when they pulled him over, the understanding, I say pulled over, after they performed a pit move and his vehicle spun around and they got it stopped, he did resist arrest. He did have methamphetamine and mushrooms in the vehicle, And obviously those are violations, but also he had a firearm in his glove compartment. So my understanding, obviously I can't see it, but after they stopped him, he resisted, and then as he reached, they let the canine go, and he got on his arm, and he was safely detained. Unfortunately, he does have, I haven't seen him, but I have, my mentor Hugh Kirby did reach out to him and get to see him, and he just told me about the bandages and kind of what that looks like. And so, right now I'm making arrangements to, go visit him. There was a time where this would have overwhelmed me. Like I would have taken it personal. Somehow I would have made it about me and all the things that I'm having to deal with. But, again, I'm in a different place now. And so, this is not the time to abandon him where he's going somewhere where potentially there's no hope for a long period of time. I'm still his brother. I still love him. And while I have boundaries and I have, things that I will and won't do, I do want him to know that I love him, and I'll do anything I can to help him, within, what I feel led and is responsible. But again, ultimately, the choices he made and the struggles he had with addiction, they do catch up. The drugs work until they don't. And anybody that's ever had to come off pain pills after a major surgery like I did, if you don't know what's happening to you, you're losing your mind. You're having panic attacks. You're having all kinds of outcomes. There's cross addictions with alcohol and pornography and nicotine and whatever else you throw in there because you're just chasing to feel normal. And so, while I don't know exactly what he was doing in his spare time, he wasn't employed. He did have health issues, which I had posted after my mom passed, which was really, really, really hard for him. And he had two. I think there were two, but at least one heart attack. And the opportunity was there to get help then. And it's just my personal opinion, but there is the term institutionalized. There's a lot of people that do get out of prison and they do turn their life around and make the right choices, but it's hard. Especially if that's all you keep doing what you go to the same community that and eventually you're doing the only thing to do to numb the emotions of grief. And I believe that was absolutely a catalyst, for what transpired last week.
Yeah, they call it going back to the dragon's lair, I believe, when you get out of kind of being reformed, you don't know anything else. A couple people commented when I reported on your original post about this, why doesn't he just go to rehab? And what I commented back was, I don't know if he would even have access to rehab because I'm not sure what his employment situation is. Is there any type of program he could have been in, or what he gets out of this?
When I tell you, I'm so glad that question got asked. So, when I went through therapy and when I, sought treatment and they have outpatient treatment, and let me drop David Cleope's name in here. What was that? What was it they said in Almost Famous? He's my ambassador of Quan or something like that. David has been a mentor for several years, and so a couple of years ago, David approached me. I have some physical limitations and things that keep me at home a lot, and he asked me if I'd be willing to take some phone calls for a nonprofit that I've since stepped away from. But I had the opportunity to dive into that world because I did have I do have a job in corporate America. I had excellent, commercial insurance. And so when I was out in the world with David, who, he's a success story of somebody that turned his life around after run-ins with the law. And so, it is the joke, but if I can do it, anybody can, kind of thing. Right. But it's a willingness. It's not a matter of access in most cases, it's education and willingness. So under the Affordable Care Act, marketplace insurance, which can be accessed through healthcare.gov, and there's also insurance brokers that can help you with that. And so there are insurance plans that, based on your economics and your address, they can pull up available insurance plans, and each county is a little bit different, as I understand. I'm not a broker, but I refer to them in these cases. But they have $0 copay marketplace insurance based on your income and qualifications that produce these options. The different treatment centers have different contracts, so it's not like you can go to any treatment center. But typically speaking, kind of the model that David and I always stuck to was, depending on the last day of use and the drug you're on, or whether it be alcohol is very severe detox. So, you're getting around the clock care. So you're going to go to detox. And what I'll share with that is, this is some statistics that I've read. I'm not going to say that they haven't changed or there's not other versions of it, but 99.8% of people that only go to detox will relapse. And a lot of times people say, well, I'm sober, I'm in recovery. And they're sober or doing well for 3 months. And, that's not sober. That's not recovery. It takes 12 to 14 months before your brain starts to function, and the neuroplasticity brings back to life the natural dopamine and serotonin. You've destroyed your stomach lining, so you're not really absorbing nutrients. Like, your body has to adjust and your mind has to catch up. And so I know, after I quit the medication that I was on that was prescribed, 90 days later, I was crying every day, and then, you keep going and you keep going. And for me, I chose, with my disability, to not take anything addictive after having a bad experience. I'm actually up for a neurostimulator surgery, and I've declined any of the pain medication because of the experience I had. And so, the insurance plan do have copays, but the treatment centers will work with you. And so it's typically detox, and then there's the 30-day program. Now, that has been advertised and sold to America like that's like the 30-day boot camp. Let me just tell you that that's a drop in the bucket. If you look at how many people start a diet and they quit after 2 weeks, it's not that they don't have willpower. It's not that they're bad people. They're depressed because they're not getting the sugar and the dopamine and all the things they get from this normal lifestyle. And it takes time for your body to adjust. And so, you have the 30 days, and 95% of people that only do 30 days will relapse. I refer to it as regularly scheduled programming, because you haven't actually gotten to a point where, you're having all of your faculties available. But detox 30-day, and then there's a 90-day, and a lot of those are intensive inpatient residential, but they're outpatient, so they're Monday through Friday, and then you're getting back to work. Those are 90 days. All of that is covered by your insurance policy that's available through the marketplace. And while I hold no political position, my position is my faith, but the access to insurance is there. It's just a matter of people knowing it's available. So with David, I had the opportunity to really help the least of these, the people that didn't know how the system worked. And for me, I was lucky. I had all that. And so he gave me the opportunity to dive in and figure it out, and to meet a bunch of treatment centers here in Georgia. So when I can, I volunteer my time for a couple of different ministries where, when they can't help that person, they'll go call Travis, and I will assess the situation for the family, set them up for success as well. And then, set boundaries, and, here's what this needs to look like. I get them in touch with counselors, just tell them what's there. And, obviously 12-step groups are each group can be different, but the application of it is the hard part. The material is phenomenal. But when you're looking at somebody that's dealing with addiction, and you look at success rates, you got the detox, you got the 30-day, then you got 90-day, then it's really ideal they stay in a community of people. There's accountability, and there's people that's supportive of their recovery. And so, the relapse rate of somebody doing the 90 days is still 66%. And so you look forward, in about 18 months, it goes up to around only 40 to 50% will relapse. But there's something magical about 36 months. So at 12 to 14 months, you're neurologically there, and you're seeing a lot of things come back that you didn't even realize. Like, I remember having some thoughts, and something happened, and I remember I called my mentor. I was like, why did I just say that? And it was still, these fears. I will tell you this: for years, again, medication and doctors involved, I was chasing a mental health diagnosis for what I found out was a spiritual affliction. I did not know how to do life on life's terms. I wanted to control everything. If I were to sum it up, I was playing God. So, was there an opportunity for him to go? Yes. He actually got into the insurance at the beginning of the year. I had tried to offer that solution for him before. And, if he would have been willing, and I can say about, coming up on 2 weeks ago, but a week before the incident, I pleaded with him, please go. And, unfortunately, it's like trying to talk to somebody with cancer and say, just get rid of the tumor, just get rid of it. You can do it. Just think your way out of it, and in reality, the addiction has been, classified as a medical condition since 1951. The 80s with Nancy Reagan kind of ruined it by just say no. And yes, it is a willpower thing to an extent, but it's also a willingness to not do what your brain's telling you to and listen to somebody else. But at that 3-year mark, you can see across the board that success rates of people that relapse, it goes down to 10%. So 90% of people never use again. The resources are available. It's just a matter of, education, and in those communities where I'm talking to people like their family has abandoned them, that nobody's talking to them. And, you may be the only person. I mean, I've been on the phone with somebody that was suicidal, and you get them into treatment, and you just praise God that you had the ability that day to be available. But yes, the opportunities were presented. He wasn't open to it, and ultimately, this was the outcome.
Now you're saying he was caught with methamphetamine. Could you explain what exactly that is, and like what I think Buff Bagwell was caught with that at one point, and he's doing better too. And he also had a driving incident, I believe, maybe a couple of them. Yeah. What is it about that messes a person up? And it seems if you take that, and I'm not trying to make light of it, but don't drive, because that seems to be a bad mistake.
So, and I can only speak to the experience I've had, talking to tons of men and women that have used. That's not something I have ever used before personally, but it's a stimulant. There's only 2 things I've seen. Well, I'll say 3. I have met and seen people that were alcoholics, and severe alcoholism, and from the ages of 28 to 55. And when they decided to quit, they did not get medical care, and that alcohol will destroy you. Your brain has learned to process it as fuel. So your brain's operating on alcohol. You've destroyed, everything. You're just destroying all the bacteria in your stomach that would even, give you any sustaining life. And so it is a very dangerous thing to detox on its own. And it can be deadly. There's a change of brain synapses and satiation. We'll go too deep into that.
I have heard that as well, though. There's a couple of detoxes that can kill you. I think one of them is a type of painkiller, and another one, I think it might be oxycodone, right? And then alcohol might be another one where if you're not observed when you're detoxing, you could actually die.
Yeah, I only know, what I would say is all of them are dangerous. And at the end of the day, like, you're going to have severe effects emotionally and physically. So As I understand it, people that are coming off meth start to have nerve pain, right? So often they will prescribe them a maintenance drug that helps with the nerve pain through that initial relapse period. And alcohol, that's the most dangerous one as I understand it. And I mean, I've met people that were in their early 30s, went after it for 6 months, and their liver, they needed a new liver. Now I've met people that they said you're going to need a new liver, and a miracle happens and they survive. But I've also seen people that or talk to people that when they quit, they literally lose their mind. Like they're throwing stuff, they get angry. It is individual specific and type of alcohol. I mean, there's so many subsets of what that falls into. But the reality is that's the one they keep you the longest to make sure your organs don't shut down. When you come off of opiates, or if you come off of, meth, or even marijuana, there are side effects, and marijuana has changed over the last 50 years. It used to be, when I was a kid, it was like 11% THC, and now you have some that are in the 90s. And I've seen recently kids before the age of 25, go into psychosis from like living in storage rooms and stuff like that.
And with me, I used to be able to take it better, but I'll get extreme paranoia now to the point where the medicinal effect of it will not even be worth the paranoia effect I get from consuming marijuana, which is legal now in Canada and in a bunch of states. But yeah, it has changed. I don't know if it's the stuff that's changed or if I've just changed.
Well, a little bit of both. I think that you're seeing a flower at 30% THC, and so I with my arm, I think my right arm's actually worse than my dad's. But I injured my right arm when I was 30. It was 2013, so 12 years ago, and I lost the use of it. And they prescribed me 24 pain pills a day, 12 Percocet, 12 Tramadol, and I was taking 9,000 milligrams of gabapentin. And I started weaning off of it because I hated it. And when I did, obviously all these mental health symptoms were coming up. And, and I saw somebody point out benzodiazepines. That's the other one that's dangerous. But I there it is. Mike Jones said it. He is correct. I couldn't remember the other one. But when you look at meth in particular, and I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, it's the one thing that I've seen that at some point your brain can snap, and I mean you're done. There's no, like, you're now having schizoaffective type symptoms. And a lot of the symptoms that we give, like if you look at bipolar and alcoholism, the symptoms look very similar. And so I'll tell you, the last thing I was prescribed was marijuana, and when I tried to come off it, I felt like I was dying. And it turns out like it speeds up your metabolism. My blood pressure changed from 120/73 to, like, at one point I measured, it was like 210/150, and I'm getting it down to try to have a normal day, but I was panicking. I couldn't sleep. And anything that you do that changes your outlook of your mind, it's going to have a negative effect on you when you change. Like, just go without your coffee for one day, leave your cell phone somewhere else. There's so many things in your routine you're attached to that are giving you dopamine that, just multiply it by that when it becomes the drugs. But meth, it is a stimulant. The most dangerous way that you use it is they use it by IV. And I've seen some really bad, outcomes from that. But ultimately there's hope. Like, there are places, like it's that place where you get, where I remember sitting with a doctor. And he's still my pain doctor. And so we're doing all natural. That's why I'm doing the neurostimulator for my back pain and my leg pain, because I generally don't feel my feet. But I sat with him and we were talking about this. I said, Doc, everybody's telling me I'm wrong. I'm telling you, this stuff is destroying me, and I don't want it. I don't like my mental state with it. And he said, Travis, I'll figure it out with you. So we went to, I took a muscle relax. I took Lyrica, pregabalin, which is, for nerve pain. And, we went a different route, and now I'm working through it in a different way. But I've also haven't used anything in over a year and a half, and the doctors know I won't take it. I refuse it. So, when you look at all of the drugs that are available, Hannibal, like they're all different now. Like back when I was a kid, I remember the story of Lenny Bias. He was a first round draft pick by the Boston Celtics, and they were like, he did cocaine one time and he died, and that very may well be true. But I know a bunch of other people did cocaine one time and they didn't die. So it's like you've given me this extreme version, and then when I find out it's not true, now I don't trust anything you said. Now I'm not condoning cocaine by any stretch of the imagination, but nobody died back then like they do. Like there's over 100,000 deaths per year from fentanyl overdose. Right? Like, and I know people hear about the news and we turn it into, an immigration thing like that stuff's coming in from everywhere, and it's getting laced in everything. And back 30, 40 years ago, if you got something, maybe worst case scenario was it was laced with, baby laxative. Now it could be a death.
Yeah. Or they mix speed in to weaken it.
Yeah.
No, I've heard of tons of cases of that. I've heard towns in Canada where they've actually said, "Hey, we know you're never supposed to do drugs, but now we're telling you there's fentanyl mixed in with your stuff. You're gonna die."
So, give you an example. During the Vietnam War, they said that 90% of the soldiers that used heroin in Vietnam, when they came back to the U.S., never touched it again. So there is something to say about like how things are different, because that's not the percentage now, right? But ultimately, we're trying to deal with life in a way that we don't have to deal with life. We numb everything, and your body. Like I said this the other day, pain is a conversation with your body that no one else can see or hear, and it's asking for relief. Anxiety is a conversation with your body that no one else can see or hear, and it's asking for comfort and control. You can numb those voices as much as you want, but if you ignore those voices, they will consume you. They will consume you, and like. Again, there's things that I look back on in my life. I drank a lot in my 20s and 30s, and I after Dad died, I did go back to drinking for about a year, and then a year later I was like, that's it, I'm done, right? And so I went through that grieving process, and be honest with you, if it wasn't for those social media pages and the fans that reached out to me when I was at the lowest of my life, like I don't know what would have happened. Because they liked my dad, and we were doing this because I was trying to honor Dad, and it was my way of grieving. But they focused on Travis, and it was this crazy thing where you lose your identity. I was no longer Mr. Wonderful's son. I was just Travis, and Travis wasn't happy. He was miserable. And, I didn't know, even in my own mind, that I had created two identities. One was complete kayfabe, because I would, everybody loved Dad, and that made it easy. But there was also me that was dealing with things with my brother and dealing with things with my mom. And, we had to pretend like everything was fine. And so, I got to a place where I had to be happy with me and content with me. And for me, through my faith, and I'm very open about my faith in Jesus Christ, like I found my identity, and it wasn't the executive at the bank. It wasn't Mr. Wonderful's son. It was a child of God. And when I quit playing God, and when I allowed other men around me that had done life better than I have and started to listen to them and take suggestions, my entire life trajectory, my entire purpose in life changed. Even so much that, I started reading these stories about things my dad did, and really those are the legacy things he left is not the rose. It's these stories that people have that my dad touched them in a meaningful way, that they had these great childhood experiences, and I get to relive them with them. But my dad was gone a lot, and life kind of stunk when it was just me and my mom and my brother. And if my brother wasn't there, it was just me and my mom, that was kind of stunk too. I hated fans because they took my daddy away. You know, I'd be sitting there on the baseball game, you know, going up to bat, and I'm looking up and there's a line, and I just want him to watch me. This is all I get. And then you get to hear these stories of all the things he did. And I went, wow, like that sacrifice was meaningful. Like my dad not being around, he was genuinely changing people's lives for the positive. Not Hogan's, but everybody else's, right? But, you know, I was so grateful. And then I also came to realize that, you know, if it wasn't for those fans and the love they had for my father, I don't have anything. Like they paid my bills is what you come to understand. And so now I have as many relationships with, I mean, I have to manicure these sites because people get a little crazy with trying to be comedians, but the interactions with them have been life-changing.
Someone says they used to love that he would walk around in flip-flops and shorts all the time. Even as an agent, he was the only one that could get away. Oh, there you go.
That is just so you know, I was told I'm Florida trash. We wear flip-flops and sandals year-round. It doesn't matter what the temperature is. When we do wear sweatpants, we pull them up to our knees because I made fun of my dad. I was like, Dad, you look ridiculous. And he'd have his sweatpants. He never pulled up like, you know, right, like almost like capri pants. And then one day I'm walking around and I looked down. I was like, oh my God, I do it too. You know, so I made fun of myself that day. But yeah, like we, you know, it's funny to look at all these things my dad did. He wasn't perfect. He did drugs. He didn't lie about it. Now, I will tell you, I don't think I ever saw alcohol in our house until I was like, you know, I was out of the house and went back, and he would drink beer. And that was like, oh my gosh, you know, because of the way we had to eat as children. But my dad was very honest with me when I was in my 20s and was like, hey, I cycled these things. Like, and I've actually gone back and watched, you know, some of these videos, and I can see how his physical stature would change throughout the year. He would have these peak moments, and they were typically kind of like scheduled around a large event. And so, you know, there's nobody that is ever going to tell you that didn't happen, and that those things didn't get done. But there was a different way. I've never met anybody like him that was so intuitive about his body. And as a child, we weren't allowed to wear shoes. Dad would say they're bad for you. He's like, the grass is good for you. You know, it's good for your energy. And then,
now they call it grounding, right?
Dude, every single thing he had us do turned out to be like, this was like 2 years ago. And I was just thinking about my childhood. And one of them was because I was walking my dog, and this lady came up and she goes, do you own shirts? And I was like, what? And evidently I didn't wear shirts very often. And so I tried to be more aware of it in public places, but this was outside of my house at the time. But, you know, like when we were outside, you didn't have a shirt on because the sun was good for you, right? Dad was in, like, if you look at how dark and tan my dad was, how come he never got, you know, skin cancer? And I'm pretty sure it's because he never used suntan lotion, which I've heard that has a negative effect. But, you know, not getting sun, like that was in my house, that was an expectation. You didn't wear a shirt and you didn't wear shoes unless you were going somewhere where your feet could get cut. And you know, even you know, his going hunting and being in nature, and it resets your circadian rhythm. His workout routine, like every single habit. People ask me often, like, how did you eat as a child? And I finally came up with a great way to explain it. If God made it consumable, that's what we ate. If God didn't make it, we didn't eat it. It wasn't in the house. We weren't allowed to have cereal and stuff around. Obviously the ingredients of food are different anyway, but every single thing he did in his life around his body has been scientifically proven to make you calmer, happier. You know, he knew what his body needed, and he listened to it. And when he listened to it, you saw the result, because he had stage 4 throat cancer at the age of 61, and he lived. And if you look at the lifestyle of many of the wrestlers, a lot of them unfortunately have died in their 40s and, you know, in their mid 50s and heart attacks. Dad only died at the age that he did because of CTE. His brain was no longer telling his throat to open up. And so he was asphyxiating every time he would eat or drink something. It wasn't because his physical body broke down. It was genuinely his mind.
Yeah, because not only was he a wrestler, he was a football player. And wasn't he like from the time he was in high school, like a high school fighter? Like he would go around to other high schools back in those days and fight like the toughest guys from the high schools as well. I've heard wrestlers from Florida tell those stories.
So Dad, believe it or not, was not a bully. Like he was, very popular in school. When he was in high school, he won. Like he held track and field records in the state of Florida, and one of them was for like it didn't get broken until 2000, and I think it was the broad jump. Dad, Lee Haney, Mr. Olympia, worked out with my dad and with my mentor Hugh, and Hugh told me this story, a couple of times. But Lee Haney looked at Dad and said, you need to kiss your mama and thank Jesus because you've got strength like it's a gift from God. This is not normal. And I think that's pretty amazing that Mr. Olympia 8 times, I think would say that to Dad. But he was a freak athlete. Now, his dad was a drinker. And I know he had fights in the parking lot, and I know a couple times they were to pay the tab. What was how he fought. I never knew him from what I got told to be a bully. I think I've had one person that said that he picked on him in high school, but to give you an idea where my dad came from, as far as his mentality, he beat up the bullies. And there's stories of that from the time that he was a kid and on. And in fact, I'll tell you, he would, he volunteered with the Special Olympics. And if you made fun of somebody that had, and we never did, but one of my friends did one time, like the R word was, for somebody that was, mentally impaired.
He wouldn't have liked Jim Cornette, in other words. He wouldn't have got along with Jim Cornette.
Oh my God. My dad ripped this kid apart. I guarantee you that kid still has not said that word to this day. Dad was he a fighter? Probably with my mom more than anybody, but she egged it on. But he was the guy that was actually more introverted than people realize. He wasn't a great person on the mic and wrestling in his early career. If you watch the 80s, like some of those things is, he kind of blows everything off. And if you look at the early days of Mr. Wonderful, right as that was coming out, he would have his back to the camera. He wasn't completely comfortable. He was introverted, insecure, like, had a rough childhood, right? For how he grew up from Winchester to Florida. So there was a lot of insecurity there. And Roddy Piper, he's told me, Dad told me before that, like, he taught me how to talk. He taught me how to let it go. And you can see the progression because his mic skills in the 90s are significantly better than they were in the early 80s.
Yeah, they seem to really pick up around the time that he was with Piper doing those WWE vignettes, and then you go into the pretty wonderful stuff, and it continued on. Did you know Piper well? Because he seems like a pretty wild guy. Was he like that on your own with him and stuff, like talking in the promo style, or how was he?
He was the complete opposite, actually. And I have known and talked to one of his daughters, Fallon, and like when I was around Roddy, he was a sweetheart. Like, came up and hugged you and kissed you on the cheek and was like, "Hey man, how are you doing?" I mean, he was the most laid back guy. Like, the thing that happened with Dad, his wrestling style was really intense, and that's why it always looked real, because he thought that was his ticket. He knew he could do that. And Roddy was able to capitalize on how to manage people's emotions, right? And so the two of them together, I think Roddy took something away from Dad as far as wrestling, the in the ring skills, and Dad more than took things from Roddy. Roddy had a way, at least from my being around him, the little bit I was, and it might have been 5-6 times in my life. And it was for extended period of time, for an hour or so. It wasn't like, a meet and greet. He was quick and he was smart. Like they didn't all that was ad lib back then. There ain't nobody writing scripts, like it is today. And I don't take away from the product, but they came up with that stuff on the fly. And he just, he had a way with words. He knew what he was good at and he focused on it. And so, Dad knew what he was good at and focused on it. And then, through those relationships and that, people talk about the brotherhood of the boys, like they genuinely would have hurt people if anything happened to the other. Like they all had each other's back like a biker gang. And while there was egos and that, ginormous egos, there was relationships there that in those quiet moments, because we would get to the match at 2 p.m., they would wrestle till 8, and tons of conversations. And some people just kind of drank and played cards. And some people were over in the corner like, hey, let's talk about, let's do this. Let's think this. What about this? I can remember being in the car with Dad, and this is probably a big evolution for him. We'd be driving down the road. I remember he was wrestling Cactus Jack at the time for this particular moment. And we were just cutting promos in the car, saying the most ridiculous things we could think of. And, at one point he'd go, I like that one. And he used it. Like, I remember hearing it. I was like, wait, that was mine. Right. But Dad, he, even when he did the Hall of Fame speech, so I'm out there with him in LA, and, I'm because he was there, he had to get there early. I got there and we were sitting together, and this is like before he went up or anything. I said, Dad, you want like a 3x5 card? You want notes or anything? And he goes, no, I got it. And he went up there and everything was off the top of his head. Everything.
I fully believe it. Eric says he loves how he scared the hell out of everyone at the WCW power plant. He seems like he really liked that job. Would I be right guessing that? Or would he rather have been on the road?
So ironically, my dad was, now he never once told me about any college classes. That's number one. But he was going to be I think he was going to be a PE teacher. And I will say, my family members joke about it because I started working out later, but I would not go to the gym with Dad because, it was all, like, I tell people all the time, I was raised one more rep, and it applied to a lot of my life. But with him, it was always like one more after 6 more. And so you're like, we would leave there after working out. And I mean, you'd crawl. It was horrible. If you did a leg day with him, you wanted to die. You're like, please God, be constipated. I do not want to sit down. Like, it was so bad. But he loved those guys. And he really I think he saw himself in them. And the times that, the Ole Andersons and the Dick Slaters and the Bill Watts and the Eddie Graham, like he was very, very genuinely grateful. Not fans too. Like people would get so excited. I got to meet your dad. And I'm like, he was just as excited. I just saw it. He was genuinely grateful. And I think he thought it was his responsibility to set these guys up for success. So I think some of it was, so I got to hang out with Chuck Palumbo and Sean, and a couple other people, like, because I actually worked right down the street. So I would just go hang out at the power plant, talk to Janie or whatever. Right. And they very much loved him and respected him because he weeded out the people that weren't really committed, and, he wasn't perfect. Nobody is. I know Adam and I had a conversation, a couple years ago about his experience at the power plant with my dad, where Dad got mad at him for not, taking the contract. And I think he's posted the letter online as a motivator. So, there are people that, they pave their own way, but Dad loved those guys, and he thought he was setting them up for a lifetime of success in wrestling. And, back then, and how the styles have changed, you didn't play to a camera. You played to your audience. You played to the fans. So all of your actions were very much like being in the middle of a circus. You were playing to every corner of the room. And versus, I went to an event, which I was grateful to go to. And I took some friends and my girlfriend after my mom passed, which was fun for me. I actually wore the robe. I didn't tell anybody it was my dad, but people come up and go, "How'd you get that?" I'd be like, "Oh, I inherited it." And, then, people would ask for pictures and ask questions and stuff. But, when I was there, we were sitting on the side where the cameras, they were, facing it. Right. And, having heard my dad talk all these years about these things, it's very much, you can see that the flow and it's not as organic. And there were some good matches. I'm not taking away from anything they do. It's just different. There's always going to be a new evolution of it. And things come and go. And so big spots and, the acrobatic moves by some of these guys that are just bigger than life. It's really impressive. But it's different. You don't see people working an arm for 20 minutes and keep going back to it and, playing into that as you get towards the end of the match for a pin. But he loved being a teacher. And he couldn't always express his emotion. So I always said that, like, when I was on the road with him and stuff, like, and there were times that this happened where he would get all, worked up about, "Yo, you're not Mr. Wonderful right now. Let's just talk about this." So, his nickname was because Brian Blair would call, and Dad called him Beeper, and Brian called Dad Oscar the Grouch. And, So, Brian was younger and he groomed him as well. I think the power plant was where his heart was the most, because at some point you can't be the champion. You can't be on top. But, Dad being able to work out all the time, and teach these guys, I think it reminded him how he started and how Hiro Matsuda put him through hell. Right. And he thought if he could put you through hell, then, you've got a 20-year career in professional wrestling that's going to take care of you and the next generation of children you have.
It's interesting that you mentioned the acrobats, because it seems now a good match is who can do the most acrobatics, where in his day it's like who can make it look the most real and make the fans suspend their disbelief. Because it's impressive, the acrobatics, but like I don't want to watch gymnasts. That's just my taste, but they're great athletes and they're making lots of money. So,
well, and I'm not in a focus group. I certainly if I have an opinion, it's going to be biased, right? Like I already know that, and I don't know anything about wrestling. All I ever watched was Dad's matches, and and the stories, and I remember sitting around watching matches and hearing him dissect them. And so sometimes like that stuff goes through my head. I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so being at the match, at least from my view, the TV angle looks like the spot hits, but for me, I'm watching, I'm like, that was like a foot apart. And, so they're playing to a different speed, but here's the thing about all that. It will never be the way we had it. And it shouldn't be. It's always supposed to change. Music changes, life changes. Nothing stays the same. And so to complain about it is to not respect, the time you had with these people. Like these men and women moved you and you loved them for it. I'm gonna mention Jay Parker. He might listen, but remember he sent me a picture. He had drawn green lines down his arm as a kid so it looked like Dad's veins, right? For his birthday, I told him I was gonna send him a green marker. That is irreplaceable. Now, that being said, as I sat there in that room and I turned around, and I remember Diamond Dallas Page was doing a signing once, and his wife and I were behind him, or in front of him, and there was a line of people, and he hasn't wrestled in 20 years, right? And he's at this signing, and I saw these people, and I looked at his wife. I said, I've never been that happy about anything ever. I don't even know what that feels like. And so there's a little bit of envy that you have this world that you love and you get into the stories. And, for me, it was just my childhood. So it's like, it's like people would ask me, who was your favorite wrestler? I was like, my dad. Like I was in the dressing room. They were really disgusting. My dad had the best body, right? Like, and was the cleanest. And so, he wasn't sweaty and nasty, but like when I'm sitting there in WWE Raw, right? And I'm looking behind me and I'm starting to see a couple things change. Number one is there are kids there, and I say kids 16 to 22 years old, of all different kinds of backgrounds. And it's a completely diverse environment. Like every age, every race, every background, some wealthy, some not, like everybody's there, and they are high-fiving each other and they are screaming together and putting their arms around each other. Don't dismiss this generation of wrestlers, because they're now having the experience with these guys that you had with them. Maybe it's not what it was back then, but it doesn't have to be, because these folks love it. And if you look at the thing that I saw change so much, there used to be a lot more grandmas on the front row that would, hit you with a beer bottle. But I saw a lot of young women there cheering on and carrying around a belt. And if you had told me that would be the case when I was growing up, I would have told you were crazy. But I will say this, maybe the men's wrestling has changed in this spot. The women's wrestling has out of the stratosphere improved. Like Caitlin Clark, WNBA, the women's wrestling has gotten very good and presents a very good product. So to see young women in that crowd, like, quit dismissing that this is their generation. This is their time. They love it for them, because they're getting the same experience you did. It's just with different people and with a different type of wrestling.
Yeah, I agree with you. For the women, I'd actually rather watch the women these days for whatever reason. What was your favorite feud of your dad's as we wind things down here on a bit of a happier note?
Well, if I had to think of the feud, when I go back and watch, and I understand Hulk Hogan and why people would think that, and there are these moments like the cage, the Saturday Night main event, the cage match, like those are priceless, perfect. Like, still looking back without having the TV, cameras, like they had to pull that off. It wasn't like they could do what they can do now with timing and filming. The matches that I've gone back and watched, and for 5-10 minutes at times, I really enjoyed the ones with Cactus Jack, and then I also like the ones with Tito Santana. And those matches, it just looked like they were going to war. Like, even me, I'm sitting on this front, edge of my seat watching this, and I'm like, I can't believe this is evoking an emotion for something that happened nearly 40 years ago, right? But those, Dad loved his matches with Brian Blair. Dad loved his matches with Tito a lot. If you go back and watch the Japan Pro Wrestling, those matches are phenomenal, completely different style, and I really enjoyed those. But those moments of Cactus Jack, I remember being at the matches. So there might be something connected to the fact that I was there with Dad and Mick, like in the dressing room while they were planning things out and talking through it. So there's certainly an element of that. But I will tell you my favorite match, and I wish I remembered all the details, but I'm old, right? And so the things fade, and I'm quick to say I think I remember, right? Versus I'm positive. There was a match I watched. I think I was 15 years old, maybe 16, but it was against Arn Anderson, and Dad did a reverse small package to win. And I remember being there, and I hollered when he won. Like, that was one of the only times I've ever had a visceral reaction to one of Dad's matches. And Arn Anderson, phenomenal wrestler. And doesn't get, some people get more praise because of their body, but Arn Anderson was solid. And when you get two guys that know how to go at it, man, it's something special. It really is. And I think we're all grateful that we had those moments in our life that bring us so much joy.
What was your dad's feeling on the whole Vader thing? Because we know that sadly it kind of destroyed Vader. And I mean, I did one of his last interviews. Like, this this pretty much ruined him mentally. Was it ever a big thing to your dad, or was it just, oh, it's another day at the office? I had to step it up a bit. I'm glad I didn't get fired.
Right. So he was worried about getting fired. And Leon, during that period of time, I think he was pretty unhappy, at least from what I understand. Right now, keep in mind, Leon had just given me his dog had puppies, and he gave me one of the puppies. So I got a puppy right before this goes down from Leon. So they were good.
I never knew that. That's crazy,
bro. Like, so when he comes home with that, I'm like, because we called her Haley, and she was in the backyard. And I'm like, do I got to give the dog back? Like, what happens now? It was such a, yeah. So like, I don't think Dad would always, and I don't want to ever speak bad. So what I'll start with is those two men before Leon passed were at an event. I want to say it was in North Carolina or Virginia, and they made up. They made peace. They made amends. And they even went out on stage together and hugged in front of the entire crowd. And we've posted that so many times. And that's the part of the story that I want people to remember. It's like the other day, somebody was telling the story about Dad leaving the plaque. And I'm like, well, that's true. But the ending is better because I brought it home. And when we got home, after some period of time, because Dad was kind of frustrated with how the event went with the Hall of Fame, and they had filmed everybody, but they didn't show anybody on TV really other than Hogan. At least that was kind of the thing. And so, Dad still had an ego. He was a little irritated, but I put the plaque in and we went home. And he complained about the ring and he complained about the $20 plaque. And then a couple of years later, my niece Brandy, she put the plaque up on the wall, and he wore his ring. So you got to know that the story is always really good because they have bad tempers and egos. But the truth was, my dad was extremely grateful and teared up when I gave him the plaque. He said, I'm so glad you did that. And it's because I know my dad. I know my dad. Like, I know what he's going to do, right? He's going to get emotional. He's going to get upset. And then he's going to calm down and regret some of it. So with Vader, what I'll tell you is I got the same story all of you did. Like, as far as, Vader had been a bully to some of the guys, and he was pretty stiff with them. Some of them were getting hurt. There started to be some backroom complaints. I think, one thing led to another, and Dad had a very short temper, without a question. If you've heard the story about him ripping the steering wheel off the car. But
yeah, thank God that didn't kill you guys.
I wasn't in the car, but Bobby Sweeney was picking on him. He did it like twice, though. Bobby told me the story in LA, and we're sitting up in the back. He's like, man, it was so easy to get under your dad's skin, but Dad would never get mad at you. Like, he might yell and scream, and it was like a dynamite. It would explode in front of you, but you're not getting any dust on you, right? Like, you're just watching it happen. And Bobby just, man, he was hilarious, and he would dig. And, I actually, as I got older, because I had gotten picked on, so now I knew how to do it. And I would cross that line with people. They were like, oh, you're not supposed to say that. I'm like, what? This is like no holds barred here, right? But with Leon, I think Leon was in a negative place in his life. I think he was frustrated. I think that the outcome of that right then, I think he was hurt. A lot of these guys, Leon did some crazy, crazy stuff with a lot of weight on him. One argument led to the other. I think Dad was already kind of miffed about some of the boys complaining, and Dad's version was that, he sucker punched him when he came in after like a second or third time. And then according to the people that I know that were in the room that told me after, because I saw Dad like later that day, right? Like, it wasn't like, I didn't get to talk to him about it like almost immediately afterwards because he was scared he was going to lose his job. But my understanding is, he knocked him out with one punch, and with all the stories I've heard about Dad's strength and his fighting and some of the stuff, like, I know these guys were wrestlers. I know they were good athletes, but knowing how to throw a punch is the difference between Mike Tyson and Leon Spinks, right? Like, at some point, the guy that can hit you the hardest can knock you out if he catches you the right way. What transpired if Leon backed off and, was afraid he was going to lose his job? I'm like, well, you already hit him. So what's the point? So some of the logic and the thing about wrestlers and wrestling stories is there will be 10 people in the room and all 10 of them will have 10 different stories, and it'll depend on the environment. I've seen my dad do it. They play a character and they're always in character. And so when that camera comes on, Dad's Mr. Wonderful. And then the camera goes off and he's back to being Dad. And every once in a while they would mix. I think that the downside of these guys playing the same role forever is if you did that with an actor, they would lose themselves in the character. And I think a lot of times that does happen. But ultimately, they stopped the fight. Whether Leon was going to get back up or not, I don't know. I really don't. And Dad only told me what happened. He might not have seen the other part. They don't, who knows?
I heard Haku walked in and who knows if it would have continued or not, but Leon was down at that point.
Right. Haku is, this is what I'll say. There's some really, really bad dudes, right? Like, I mean, they could throw down. All of them would have different styles. Every one of them would have had something different. And I think if you put a couple of them in a match, it might be 5-5. Like it might just go back and forth. It might be whoever catches who. The thing about Haku, the thing about my dad, this is just my opinion from getting to talk to some of these guys.
They'll both bite, apparently, from what we've heard.
That's where I was going. When they started it, they finished it. There was no, it was like Roman, like death, mercy, nope, death, right? Like those guys did not have any restraint. Once they turned it on, you were going to have to somehow break their mindset because they were that focused. And what separates these fighters and the guys that are the tough guys, I'm like, that guy would lose. And the only reason is because he's got something to lose. Dad didn't think like that. So when he hit Leon, he didn't care at that point. He only cared about it afterwards, right? He didn't have that thing that flipped his head to go, don't do this. And I think a lot of those other guys did. Kurt Angle is I think he's probably one of the best athletes to ever wrestle. Amazing person, but like take people on their peak. I think Kurt would be like, yo, like stop. Like we can stop now, not because he's a weak man, but because I think he's intelligent, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I would put your dad, Harley Race, and Haku as probably my top three from that era.
Razor blades to the party. You know what I'm saying? Like it's blood sport.
And Harley's bringing guns. Did you ever meet Harley? I know he would have been winding it down by the time your dad was in WCW, but he was a pretty wild guy.
Well, it was kind of awesome because, Atlanta, where WCW was, I could go up there, and spend time with Dad in the back. And, I might go sit, like I've told this story before, but Joe Hamilton Jr., Nick Patrick, I was the first person ever put a guitar in my hands. And I got one in my room now because of Nick Patrick putting a guitar in my hands in a dressing room. So I did get to meet him. And here's what I'll say about, Steve Austin, Rick Rude, Rick Steiner, Harley, Piper, like when they were around the boys and no camera was around, most of them were very timid and like subdued, right? Like Steve probably wasn't, because I know I went over, he would call the house sometimes and just make fun of me for 5 minutes and go, where's your dad? But Brian Blair, like Brian was at some of those fights with Dad and participating, as I understand it, right? But most of those guys, the version you think they are, and I can only say the experience I had because it was always in a dressing room, right? It was always in the backstage. Even Rick was quiet when he came over the house. Rick Steiner was quiet. Like they're super chill, right? And so my experience meeting Harley, like it was quick. It was a shake of the hand, and Dad would always make a point when I met somebody to put them over. Like he would tell me why they were great at what they did. And Harley taught me this, or, whether it was Ricky Steamboat or anybody that I interacted with, there was a story of something positive. Otherwise he didn't introduce me. But most of those guys, like genuinely speaking, even when I remember I was 19, I went to it was in northern Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama. They were doing a show, and I went up there, and Hulk Hogan, Dad always called him Terry, knew I was there and said, I want to see him. I haven't seen him in a long time, right? And Randy's in the room, and I come in, like, they're asking me about school, right? They're asking me, like, what are you going to go to school for? Well, don't get too smart on us. Don't do this job. Go do something with your brain. Like, they were just genuinely nice human beings. And when I hear people talk about them, I get why you think, like, there's some people who've done some really horrible things. I'm not condoning that. But I am saying the version you think you have, it isn't that person. It really isn't. Most of them, at least in my experience, the baddest dudes on the planet are the sweetest. Love you too, Lacey.
There you go. You're popular. Well, I appreciate you coming on here. And fans, if you want to know the title of this, you can go back to the start. The second half is more about his father's career. Is there anything you want to kind of wrap up with here about this whole situation? And I truly hope that there can be a resolution to this that can save your brother before a fatal thing happens, either with him or we end up in a Tammy Sitch type situation.
I think what I would share is, listen, I've suffered and struggled with addiction myself. Whether it doesn't matter how you get there. Some can go through a doctor, but often, and more often than not, we're all looking to self-medicate feelings and emotions and things that are going on in our life that we don't know how to deal with. I've seen some of the most well-rounded, loving people completely destroyed after somebody has passed, a husband, a child. For me, by the grace of God and my Lord and Savior, I was able to find my purpose and place in my faith, but it came with a price. I had to give up myself. I had to give up my will. I had to get in front of a couple of guys that I trusted that were living a life that I knew I wanted, and said, I'm going to listen to you. And before I make some of these decisions on how I'm going to handle things, I'm going to do it different. It is never too late to ask for help until it's too late. And my brother, again, like I'm so grateful for the fact that he's safe. He's safe from himself. He is not out of my life because that happened. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to enable him. So don't get that confused. But if you need help, reach out. There are resources. The cool thing is, all of y'all know where I'm at. You can find me online. I don't always have the answer. In fact, more often than not, I don't. I have a lot of information, but I don't have the answer. But please don't hesitate to reach out, because the people that are in recovery, either for mental health or substance abuse, whatever that looks like, they drastically change their lives. And then every person after that they touch has an opportunity to have a good life and a fulfilling life and a life of purpose. Yes, my dad was a professional wrestler, and yes, my brother was on the news because of it. At the end of the day, we all are struggling with something. Fame doesn't make life better. It never has. And most of this stuff was not in the public eye for you to know why my life wasn't wonderful. But I didn't find my place in this world because of my dad. It's because I lost my dad. And that's when I knew I had to find something that I could put my flag in and build my house on, that was made of something solid, and it wasn't based on sand. Because all the titles, the money, the relationships, none of it worked. And so I pray that you ask for help if you need it. There's nothing wrong with asking for it. And I assure you that there are open arms on the other side without any judgment or shame. That being said, I pray all of you are wonderful, and have a great rest of the year for 2025.